I want to ask you about another one of your Nazi books. So specifically the Nazi International, because aside from the occult aspect of things, aside from the esoteric technology aspect of things, the Nazi International seems to suggest and focus more on sort of the rat line operations and the presence of Nazis today. When we look at it, you know, we probably all seen a History Channel episode where, hey, there was this rat line thing after the war, and we brought scientists in to work on the aerospace industry. But, you know, the impression is these guys are old, they've retired now, they've served out their time, most of them are gone, and that was the end of it. There's no boys from Brazil being carefully raised in, you know, basements somewhere in places all over the world. But your book has a bit of a different suggestion to it than what we may have heard. So can you tell us why we created it and what we might get out of it?
Well, basically and bluntly, I take issue in that book with the whole idea that they just went quietly into the night or died off or whatever. What I'm suggesting in the book is that you are dealing with an extraterritorial continuance of Nazism after the war in an organized, well-financed fashion that is able to continue conducting its own independent research. And I'm suggesting something else is very, very relevant to modern times. And that is that the Nazis were quite well interlocked with various radical Islamic organizations during and, moreover, after the war, including organizations that ultimately will lead to the Palestine Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, who was the nephew of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who the Nazis were not only in bed with, but the Grand Mufti actually helped raise Muslim Waffen-SS formations to fight the Russians, and then, after the war, to remain in place as covert cells of guerrilla warfare inside the Soviet Union. So the relevance here is, in a certain sense, if you study all of these interconnections, and I barely skim on them, there are all sorts of researchers out there who have pointed out these connections between modern-day radical Islamic organizations, the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and so on and so forth, and the Nazi Party, and how those relationships continued after the war. So in a certain sense, you could almost say that this war on terror is, in effect, a war against those components of this post-war extraterritorial Nazi state. The other key element here that I do not get into in the book that I should mention is that the World Anti-Communist League changed its name. That was a huge front for this post-war CIA-Nazi nexus. It's based in Formosa in Taiwan. And this has now changed its name to the World Institute for Freedom and Democracy or some such thing. So in other words, the group is still around. This is what people have to get through their heads. Nazism isn't going to die simply because you have a bunch of old guys dying off. Now, the other thing that people need to bear in mind, and this is also crucial to the story, as I have pointed out, beginning in the SS Brotherhood of the Bell and repeatedly on interviews in blogs and so on, is when the CIA was created, the Soviet desk, the human on-the-ground intelligence, was actually provided for the CIA by General Galen's organization called Fremde Heer Oost, and that organization not only continued after the war, it became the nucleus of the modern German intelligence service, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. In other words, there is a direct historical and institutional connection between this post-war Nazi group and the intelligence service of Germany today. And that means that this ideology somehow, in my opinion, permeated not only the CIA, but you had Galen's organization formulating the analysis of Soviet capabilities and intentions. And Daniel, it got so bad that Christopher Simpson, in his book Blowback, reports that oftentimes Galen's analyses were simply retyped on CIA stationery without comment, analysis, or any editing whatsoever and handed to President Truman as their analysis of the situation. All right? So in other words, you have a Nazi general creating the intelligence documents and analysis that are going to become part of post-war American policy formation. So, in other words, the influence of this group, like it or not, the influence of this group is profound, and it's very, very deep, and it's disturbing. It should disturb people. There's no way of getting around this. And you mentioned the boys from Brazil scenario. Well, you know, again, in LBJ and the Conspiracy to Kill Kennedy, I point out that even there you have this lurking presence of this post-war Nazi group on the periphery of the Kennedy assassination, not only in New Orleans, but even more importantly, with the white Russian emigre groups in Dallas that Lee Harvey Oswald was affiliated with and introduced to by George de Mohrenschildt. Now, again, George de Mohrenschildt is one of those names that's very familiar to assassination researchers, and all of them, without exception, say, well, the guy was working for the CIA. No, he wasn't. This guy, in my opinion, has much more of the hallmarks of working for the post-war Galen outfit than he does the CIA. He's from Byelorussia. He's from Mozyr in Byelorussia. That's where Oswald ends up. That's where Galen had a significant on-the-ground presence. These post-war front organizations, Byelorussians, the Baltic nationalist groups after the war, some of the Ukrainian nationalist groups, these were all front organizations for Galen's organization. All right, we've seen the claims of neo-Nazis and neo-fascists in the Ukraine with the recent news coming from the Ukraine. And again, in my opinion, you're dealing with modern day legacies that trace directly back to Galen's organization. And again, let me drive it home. His organization was simply rolled into and became the basis for German intelligence, the Bundesnachrichtendienst. So yeah, this is a very current story, in my opinion. It's not something that just died.